safer side.
Welcome to the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, where we have trigger warning conversations. We have uncensored conversations. We exchange information. There's no therapy done here. And we also have a ton of resources that are listed in the show notes. This is going to be audio primarily, but there is going to be a video portion that shows the missing person case on there. But my guest today is not going to be shown on the video. We do have her information, her contact information that's going to be listed also. If you are triggered at any point of this podcast, which is sponsored by Anchor, it's produced by Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC, and it's also being brought to you on a pre-recorded podcast that's going to be released in September. I'd like to thank my guests already before we even get started, because we had a great conversation yesterday, and she's just a bevy of information with a heart of platinum. Again, if you're triggered at any point during this podcast, please call 911, because I'm not going to be able to show up. She's not going to be able to show up. And 911 starts the documentation process. It starts the resource acquisition to get you all the help that you need. If you don't have an immediate need for 911, then there's a number of resources that we have that are going to be available, like the domestic violence, trafficking, and sexual assault hotlines and their websites that will be listed in the show notes. We also have, for those that are dealing with substance abuse or supporters of loved ones and or family members with substance abuse issues, which includes alcohol, we have Al-Anon for the supporters. We have Narcotics Anonymous for any drug usage. And we also have Alcoholics Anonymous. Those numbers and websites are listed in the show notes. I added one other component to the resources. The new 911 number for suicide issues that started July 16 nationwide here in the States is 988. Again, 988 is the number that's set up for suicide issues. So if you need help, please don't hesitate to call 911 first, or one of those resources. Today is a very special interview that we're going to do. I have a very special guest in the house. Her name is Sara Almaraz, and I don't know why I'm getting tongue-tied. I'm just so excited, Sara. She is a dynamic individual, and part of this interview, she's going to do it in Espanol. So that's going to be exciting. It's the first time that we've done that, but I'm just thankful to Sara for what she's doing. She is a director, or the director of advocacy for BCAI. And BCAI is a Cultural Arts and Humanities Center. It's a nonprofit organization. She's a bilingual advocate for Talking Trees Incorporated. She's also part of an organization called We2 Alliance that connects with professionals, educators, and supporters who understand the challenges of raising children after childhood sexual abuse or trauma, and provide safe spaces to explore difficult topics. They also have a two-pronged approach to breaking the silence of adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse, which is what we're going to be talking about today. In addition to helping survivors find their voice and live in their truth, they are requesting bystanders to identify as listeners and take responsibility to create safe spaces for survivors to be heard. And she believes that every survivor needs listeners as they travel along the healing path. They need listeners to break their silence, help them to process, and to provide a safe space to release some pain. She says that there are approximately 60 million adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse in America, and most have grown into adulthood without anyone ever saying as much as, quote, "I'm sorry that happened to you." Half of the adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse will never disclose that experience. That includes men. Victimization is an isolating experience that deeply affects many adult survivors for the rest of their lives. healing should not be isolating. The We Too mission seeks to alleviate the isolation of adult survivors of childhood sexual trauma. Sara, my friend, what is going on with you? How are you doing today? And thank you and welcome to the Trigger Warning Talk podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your podcast. I've been following your work for a while, and you're doing amazing work in providing the space, especially for the hard topics, because these are the hard topics nobody wants to talk about, let alone even, seek therapy or any kind of help with them. But I'm doing great. I'm excited to be connecting with so many people that are aligned with my passion. The We2 Alliance is very much a passion project, and it's something that I'm passionate about, finding the people that are doing the same type of work. Because as we go through the healing journey, it's such a journey. We want something quick, and it's not a quick process. And so as we go through the cycles and the journey, it's so important to find listeners. It's so important to find people willing to have the hard conversation. So I appreciate you having the space and offering just a voice to us. So thank you for having me.
Sara, before we get started, I just want to mention to anyone that's going to be listening to this podcast, we have an update to a missing person case. And as you all know, we do missing persons cases at the end of each interview. Some of the interviews we do, like the interview we did with Theta Person, that whole interview was about a missing person case. Today, we're going to cover an update to a missing person case that we did on a previous podcast for KIERRA Coles, Mrs. LPR, missing person and true crime detective extraordinaire, among all the other things that she does. Send me this updated story that I'm going to play, and I'm going to show the video of it, but you'll be able to listen to it if you're just listening to this, because we're streaming everywhere. We're everywhere you get your favorite podcasts, including Audible. So this will be available video for Anchor, through Spotify, and the Penton Pending Consulting Solutions LLC YouTube page. But you can listen to this podcast anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. And again, that's going to be about KIERRA Coles. Sara, how did you get started even thinking about, talking about, and wanting to advocate and work with people who have been victimized with childhood sexual trauma? Let's start at your beginning.
Okay, my beginning. This goes back to childhood, honestly, because I had the unfortunate experience of being born to a pedophile father, and there's no easier way to say that. And when we moved back to the United States from Mexico, I was originally born here, but we moved back to Mexico when I was 2. And between the ages of 2 and about 8 was the majority of the deepest of my traumas in Mexico. And when we moved back to the United States, within about 6 months, my older brother, disclosed at school to a school nurse. And the school nurse then, got the ball rolling to get this predator out of the streets, off the streets, and that same night, the police came to our door and they arrested him and took him away in handcuffs. And, there was court proceedings, and it was, in the papers, and our community talked about it. We lived in a very small town. There were very few brown people in that town. I think me and my brother were probably the only brown kids in our school. And so, and within our church, we were Jehovah's Witnesses. So it was very much discussed and kind of open for discussion for people. And at that point in my journey, the confusion to my soul was so deep about everything that was happening that I just shut down and I stopped talking, period. And of course there was court proceedings, but during that time, my father bailed out of jail and fled the country, went back to Mexico. And so
Okay.
there was no justice. There was just kind of ended. And it was kind of like, all right, here's a year of court-ordered counseling during which I didn't say a word, not a single word. And that was okay with them. And they just let me color, and I colored. And and I didn't talk for a long time to anybody about anything. And I think it was the expectation that, he's gone now. So, okay, go on about life. And I stopped talking and I went on about life, And so the only story that I would ever tell was this minimized version of what happened, which was, I was molested as a kid, And so that kept my voice for so long. And the biggest turning point that was like, okay, Sara, you need some help, was that you can't just walk away from that unscathed. It's so unrealistic to think that you can walk away from that unscathed and just move on, just live. I then became pregnant with my daughter, with my first baby. And I remember taking the test, and I remember it was almost like I heard a crack in the universe, like something shifted, some major bomb went off in my head that was full of fear. Nothing but fear invaded my mind as soon as I found out that I had life coming inside of me. I was so afraid of what was going to happen to her. I didn't know it was a she at the time, but then I had my baby, and everything was so triggering. Everything was so scary. Everything what gave me anxiety. And I was starting to get flashbacks, very, very, like so many flashbacks of my trauma from early childhood. And I couldn't, because I was told that it didn't matter anymore, because I was told to move on. That's exactly what I tried to do. So I couldn't make sense of the flashbacks. I couldn't make sense of what was happening. All I knew was I was very much afraid for my daughter and what was going to happen to her in this ugly and disgusting, scary world. And what am I going to do? And I was hypervigilant, and I was having anxiety attacks back to back. Couldn't even take a shower in peace because I needed to rush out to make sure she was okay. And so I had to get help. I could not live that way. I couldn't work. I couldn't leave her. I had to not work and stay home. And that wasn't sustainable for our family. And so that's when I knew I needed help. And what happened was that I started to find work that I could take my daughter with me. Like, okay, I'll work. I need money, right? But I got to do some negotiating here. I need to take my daughter with me and make sure she's okay. So I started applying for nanny jobs. And I got hired or interviewed by a woman. She invited me to her home, brought my daughter with me, and I was telling her about, me needing to find work where I could take my daughter, and I needed to have her with me. This was a priority. And she says, oh, okay, well, I'm this person, and I am a child therapist, and I specialize in childhood trauma. And so I think that with that, the healing journey, slapped me in the face. It was not up to me at that point. It was just divine intervention that it was time to address these issues. It was time to get professional help. And that it was out there, that it existed, that this could happen, that I could heal from these things, that I could address them finally, that someone cared enough to know what happened to you, girl. What happened that makes you this way? Nobody had ever asked me a question like that, ever, until that person brought it to my attention. And she hired me, and we connected. I eventually started therapy. And so for me, the advocacy work that I landed at was also a part of the healing journey, because as I started to heal, I started going to therapy, and then I went to group therapy. I did EMDR therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, and all the different things that they tell you to try. I read all the books, The Courage to Heal, and everything that was out there, although it was minimal back then. This was 15 years ago. My daughter just
Okay.
turned 15. So the information was minimal back then. And here I was in my early 20s when it's just not the age that people start to deal with their deep issues, In their 20s, they want to have fun and live and do other things. But I was becoming a parent, and I'm like, how are people that are traumatized the way that I am doing it? Like having kids and having healthy relationships with their kids, and their kids are happy and stable. Like, how do they do it? And I needed answers. I needed answers to, all I knew was what not to do. The only example from my parents was of what not to do. And I had so many distorted messages from growing up that I didn't know what to do. And so I had to find other people like me. Therapy was helpful in reprocessing the information. I will never not encourage therapy. But what I do think that escalated my healing the most was building community around this particular ugly subject. And so that's eventually how the We2 Alliance got started. I connected with a woman named Rosina Bokhari. She's a psychologist out of Arizona, and she earned her PhD in psychology, but also did the internal work of her traumas. And so she's also a survivor, and decided that she was going to support survivors on this journey, because it wasn't as simple. She had all the knowledge, she earned a PhD in psychology, and yet she still had the effects of the trauma, residual effects. And then, so her empowerment model was what drew me to her, and this living openly model that she taught me. And so living openly meant finally having a voice, finally talking and being honest about what had happened and what made me what I am. This is what makes me do this. This is what makes me do that. There are reasons. If there is any level of disorder, any diagnosis, any sort of malfunction in the body, it's always, we tend to just diagnose it and medicate it and treat it. But why are we not asking of, like, how did you get the disorder? How is it that you have PTSD or CPTSD or anxiety disorder or et cetera and so on? How is it that you got there? I was being diagnosed with things like arthritis or fibromyalgia and things like that. But really what was happening was I was processing trauma in therapy and having the effect of it on my body. My body was feeling all of, the processing of the trauma again. And so no one was asking the questions or the correlations until I would say, well, actually, yes, I may have arthritis, but also I'm in therapy because I'm dealing with childhood trauma because I was sexually abused by my father. And then the light bulbs go off in their heads as professionals, as doctors, to say, oh, okay, now I understand why you have such and such and such symptoms, because it's related to the childhood trauma. And those questions often don't get asked because we are so embarrassed and so deep in our shame and our guilt that we don't even dare say, I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. Don't even dare say it or spit it out of our mouths, because every time that we've said it before, we've been told to be quiet. We've been told it doesn't matter. We've been told to move on. We've been told, I grew up Jehovah's Witness, and we forgive. Just forgive and forget. Forgiveness is hammered into our heads as a means of survival, because if we don't forgive, God won't forgive you and your sins. And I had such an issue with that. I had such an issue with the forgiveness part of this healing process, because I do believe that some things are unforgivable. I do believe that something like this is unforgivable, and my father's actions are unforgivable. Not something he would even apologize for. So why am I being preached that I need to forgive in order for God to forgive me? Why am I responsible for his sins, And so that created a big gap in my healing, where I just became angry because I was expected to forgive and forget all the time. Forgive and forget and move on. Let it go. There's such a famous song, let it go. Like, we can belt it out, right? Just let it go.
Yep.
And
There you go.
and I felt like there was so much more to say than that. There's still so much more to say than that. I remember working with Dr. Bakari and helping people find their voices with Talking Trees. We have a Facebook page, and she would post daily. She posted daily for 10 years before she moved on to other projects recently. But for those 10 years, she was posting every single day. And for a number of years, I was administering the Facebook page, and I was able to support survivors as they're finding their voice, as they're resonating with the messages that she's putting out. They are commenting and sometimes disclosing for the very first time in their lives ever. And along different parts of their journeys would come in and comment about their, where they were at on their healing journey and how it resonated with them. And we built community in that beautiful way. And then I remember that as we were creating that movement of helping people find their voice, #MeToo was everywhere for a second. It started. And at that point was when the We2 Alliance kind of started to form in my head. I wasn't quite ready to speak on it yet or, move on it yet, but I was having these conversations with Dr. Bakari of saying, okay, but this just feels a little bit too easy for me to have a hashtag that addresses what I'm spending not only money on in therapy, that's not cheap or easy to find. Not only, resources, time and energy and, reading all the books and listening to the podcasts and all of these things to help me heal. But now it almost feels like a hashtag just like wiped all of that out, because now all I have to do is #MeToo and everybody just knows what I'm talking about. And I still felt like that was a bit problematic. It was a bit silencing in itself. Even though it was giving a voice to some people, I felt like others may find some silencing in that because it was too easy to just put #MeToo. There was more to process. There was more to say. And there wasn't enough spaces still to be able to say, okay, I have more to say about this. Yes, #MeToo, but I have more to say about this. Yes. There wasn't still enough spaces for that, especially for people who had questions like me about my children and my parenting and how do I do this? What do I do here? I know I was not taught the right things and I want to do it right. So as things come up in childhood memories and I'm raising my children and they're, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, the ages that I experience the highest levels of trauma, not only am I working to prevent that from happening to them, not only am I working to break the cycle and offer them agency and autonomy that I was never offered, but there's also triggers in my healing. Like when the questions come up, when this comes up, when that comes up, I'm triggered, I'm upset, I need support for me, not just like there's all the parenting books. Yes, there's all the parenting books that tell you what to do, but none of the parenting books have the chapter at the end that says, okay, if you had childhood trauma, go to chapter 12. It stops at all the happy roses and sunshine and the happy memories and everything else, but they don't say, when you're triggered, do this. And so that's where I was still like, okay, we still I don't have enough answers on this, and my kids are still growing, and we need more spaces to have these conversations. I know I'm not the only one having these needing these conversations. So with the We2 Alliance, it is a play on the #MeToo movement. Although when I say that, I just want to always reiterate that I don't want to hate on the Me Too movement. I think it's powerful what it has created. Yes. But the play on and We Too part of it was the need to create more conversation, create more safe space around it, and to continue the conversation moving forward, not just limit it to a movement, but almost create a lifestyle that creates the healing from there. Because healing for me has somewhat become a lifestyle in a sense, and that the things that I do and the way that I move is all based on knowledge based healing, and real life examples of what that actually looks like. And so having community, finding people that understand the vocabulary, understand the the effects not only of that, but are also parenting and pushing forward and breaking those cycles for our children and changing the trajectory. I like to find those people, the ones that are already invested in their healing, already understand the difficulty it is to just heal from it in the beginning, and then the process of parenting our kids through all of that, and all of the triggers that come with that, and finding support.
Sarah, when I think about Me Too, I never thought of it the way that you broke it down versus We Too. And I think it's a great visual, and it's a great way to look at it from a different perspective, because in my thought about it, it's like you said, it's more inclusive when you look at it from a We Too perspective. It's more, you can engage more and have people open up more, because again, a lot of times, even to this day, when people think Me Too, it's primarily because I focus a lot on men and men's issues. And a lot of men don't subscribe to the Me Too movement because they think of it as a woman thing, or
Right.
something that's only inclusive for anybody that gender identifies as female or woman. And so I like the fact that you created this We2 Alliance, because I can talk to men, as I always do, and say, hey, here's another reason why it's important for you to feel safe and comfortable and secure to share your story and talk about your trauma. Because if you don't want to consider yourself part of the Me Too, you can consider yourself part of the We Too. It's just like I had a conversation the other day with a woman, and we were talking about journaling. And I'm part of an organization. It's called Speak Sister Brother Speak LLC. I'm the face of the Brother Speak side. And on Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern in Clubhouse, we do a journaling room for about an hour. When men think of journaling, they think of two things. First, they think of diaries. And second, they think, oh, that's some girl shit. And I say, no, you don't have to journal every day, documenting every single thing that happened to you. Journaling can be good, bad, ugly, or indifferent in terms of what interest you put on there. And it's not something that, you don't have to get some flowery, pink covered book with, bedazzled stuff on it. But if you want to, that's okay. It's about the content that you want to share with yourself and how it can help you reflect on what happened to you. It can help you to maybe organize some of your thoughts, amongst other things. And I give the example of the book about Tupac, where he had all these poems and poetry and different writings and stuff in there. And I'm like, if Tupac can journal, damn it, you can journal.
Right.
No guy has a problem with Pac, unless you're just not a fan of Pac. But, and you understand that it's important for the inclusion and not the exclusion. And I'm so glad that you founded this We2 Alliance. I want you to tell me about this advocacy work that you've done for 10 years. I want you to explain the We2 Alliance in Espanol.
En Espanol, okay. I'm going to start it in English because that's how it started. Originally with Talking Trees, and I will always credit Dr. Bakari for so much of my healing and supporting me through that. And she, and her Talking Trees page that she would post daily, I found so much knowledge that I had not seen before, and I gravitated to it because it was a professional, it was a Black woman, and she was also a survivor. Not only was she a psychologist and knew what she was talking about, not only was she a person of color, which representation truly matters when it comes to healing.
Truly matters.
And she was also had been through it, and so could speak from experience. And so I gravitated to the knowledge that she had to share. And I speak Spanish. I'm Mexican. English is not my first language. And so I wanted to start supporting the Spanish-speaking community. We had a yearly conference that we would do, an in-person conference called Safe Space Day. And we would have, it was April 15th every year for 10 years. And she would set up a conference, and we would gather as survivors from all around the country would come. And during the pandemic, we had an online conference, so we had an international audience. We actually had several countries log in. So I know that her work is reaching really far, but the statistics that she would always present was, for example, 6 million survivors in America. And I would think, gee, I wonder what that number is in Mexico. Because back when it was happening to me in Mexico, there was no protection. There was no laws. There was no one I could call. I couldn't tell a school nurse the way my brother did when we moved here. And so it was like, I wonder if this is a generational thing, the way that Dr. Bakari was breaking everything down to me. Generational trauma and how, understanding it didn't start with me. It was a generational cycle. I wasn't the only one in my family. It, goes back to my mother and my grandmother and beyond that. And understanding epigenetics and how to heal your DNA and all of that. I wanted to share it. Although I was selfishly doing the work for myself, I still wanted to share it. I wanted to support survivors that needed to understand it in a different context, because with connecting with survivors, I did connect with people who spoke Spanish where English was not their first language, and they were still benefiting from the information, but they kept saying I got to tell my family about this, but they don't speak English. So I decided that I would start Árboles Hablando, which is talking trees in Spanish. Árboles Hablando, a Facebook page. And all I did was translated Dr. Bakari's daily quote, and I posted it there. And my Facebook audience reach was Mexico specifically.
Okay.
So I got a pretty decent following, and the conversation then started in Spanish. So there I was able to translate her post, and then in the comments, continue the conversation in Spanish, which was a completely different culture and a completely different response, and this is where I'll switch to Spanish.
Okay. And before you do that,
yeah,
I got something in the chat that I want you to read in Espanol after you do this translation that I want you to say in Espanol.
Okay.
Well, go ahead.
Ok, entonces comencé esa página Árboles Hablando para dar más oportunidad de comenzar la conversación y dar más voz a las personas, porque eso es algo que podemos sanar, pero quizás nunca nos han dado el permiso de sanar esas cosas, o ni siquiera hablar o comenzar la conversación, porque siempre nos dicen que más si calladita te ves más bonita, right? Calladita te ves más bonita. And if that's what you were told, te estoy dando permiso de hablar, te estoy dando permiso de comenzar la conversación. Okay, I think I'm ready. Where's the chat? Okay, I see the chat now.
See it?
I do see it, and now I'm trying to think of one of the words. I'm going to Google this one. See it? What is the word for triggered in Spanish?
This is so new for you and myself, so
yes.
yeah.
Sí,
I
bueno,
love it.
bienvenidos a Riverside. Si necesitas en algún momento, puedes platicar aquí en este chat.
The
Okay,
second part.
the second part you want to translate. Okay, here it is. Este es el Trigger Warning Podcast. I don't know how to translate that, so I'm not going to. Si en cualquier momento estás motivado de alguna forma, puedes llamar a 911. Ellos te pueden ayudar con lo mental. Y si no necesitas ayuda inmediata, hay una lista que te puede ayudar con diferentes formas en las notas del show.
Thank you very much. And basically, she got us to our break point where I'm going to tell everybody this is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, sponsored by Anchor, produced by Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. If you're triggered at any point during this podcast, please call 911. That starts the process of you getting help. If you don't have an immediate need, but you still need resources, in the notes of the podcast, we have listed hotlines and websites for sexual assault, domestic violence, trafficking. We have resources for those that are dealing with substance abuse and alcoholism, such as Al-Anon, Narcotics Anonymous, and Alcoholics Anonymous. If you have suicidal ideation or issues with suicide, call the new 911 number set up that's nationwide, and it's 988. Again, 988. If you want to contact us for any questions, comments, concerns, issues, good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, we have an email address. That email address is triggerwarningtalkpodcast@gmail.com. Again, triggerwarningtalkpodcast@gmail.com. And again, our show is Trigger Warning Talk Podcast, because there's a couple other Trigger Warning podcasts that are out there. But if you don't see those 4 words, that's not us. Again, we're talking to Sara Almaraz. I want you to let us know about Safe Space Day.
Safe Space Day. Oh, wow. Safe Space Day was originated by Dr. Bakari. She created April 15th was our yearly anniversary, I can say. And for a while, she was in Iowa, so we would meet in Des Moines. For, I believe, 3 or 4 years, we met in Des Moines, and it was kind of a centralized Midwest location where people from, Texas and Arizona and New York and everywhere could kind of meet in the middle. And she would have a whole day of activity for survivors. We would meet, and she would have discussion. She would, present a program and knowledge-based healing resources, and would offer support in that way. And also we would have a lot more conversation between each other. So some years she would have a panel of survivors that would talk about, how they came to their healing journeys, and kind of what helped them throughout their journeys and things like that. And that was probably the very first example that I have seen of her giving people a voice in real life. And that was huge for me, to meet people of all different walks of life, all different color and size and lifestyle and career and everything, and come to this one place and have that one thing, that one commonality, and looking for safe space, right? And so then that created this beautiful energy, and I've created beautiful friendships from that, beautiful connections that still to this day we are very good friends. And I think that was the biggest thing about this being a passion project, is that I didn't want to just become, people would say, oh, you should write a book, you should, you should become a coach. I didn't want to do it for a living. I needed it selfishly for my own healing. And so I wanted to create community. And so that created, the other opportunities for me all by themselves without me seeking it to become to do it for a living. And so the connections are the biggest thing, and everyone comes with such amazing gifts, because I think that many of us who have, the way that Dr. Bakari calls it, we've mastered resilience, right? We've mastered resilience from all the things that we've been through. And here we are seeking safe space because we know more healing needs to take place. That brings us back into vulnerability, because if we're strong because we've been through so much, endured and survived, and here we are, and then we're seeking safe space, it brings us back into a vulnerable place where you have to be surrounded with the right people to be able to get into that vulnerable space. All of our families, as I know my experience is that anytime that I've disclosed, I've gotten those messages about forgive and forget. I've gotten the messages about let it go. I've gotten the messages of anything other than I'm so sorry that happened to you, or how can I support you, or I will just sit here and offer you space, to sit in that uncomfortability of your experience with this. And so Safe Space Day created that for people. And it was a yearly event that we could look forward to and build those friendships even more and see each other grow. And some of us that had kids, watch each other's kids grow throughout our healing journeys. It just became so, so important to us every year. Eventually it moved to Colorado, to Denver. And so we got to go out to Denver and visit there. And so then Dr. Bakari moved on to other work, I needed to then continue my work of building community in other forms. And so that was my first experience of building community around this. And I just needed to continue it for my healing journey. And so she has supported me immensely through that. And we were able to do a lot of local events through BCAI, which is the other organization, nonprofit that I work for. Locally is an art school. And so they offer us a lot of space to be able to put on programming that helps parents and find that safe space to talk about these hard things. Like, for example, periods. Okay, if we have any level of sexual trauma and then our kid gets their period, it's like, oh my God, here we go. And especially Black and Brown communities, this is something we don't talk about with our parents. They don't sit down and tell us what's going to happen. I know I wasn't told anything. I was handed a period product and was like, here you go figure it out. There was no conversation. And imagine a father triggered in his own trauma and then now has to have a conversation with his daughter about her vagina. Like, these are triggering subjects. These are challenging things for us. So having spaces to say, okay, I'm not really exactly sure what to say here because I wasn't taught properly, but I want my daughter to have the information. We started the Period Kits. So the Period Kits is our yearly event that we create, a in-person event, and we get donations from all around the community and to create free period kits that we hand out to the community, targeting specifically Black and Brown girls and parents who understand that this is a challenging subject and want to get it ahead of it. So before they even start their period, when they're preteen girls, let's talk about these things. We have other events that are set for the same audience, the same age group, that is bringing in professionals like our trauma experts. The connection I have locally with the child therapist specializing in childhood trauma, she comes in and does workshops where she will talk to the girls about hard topics like, what is consent, but deeper than just consent. What is consent even at 4 years old, at 5 years old, at 12 years old, at 20 years old, at 30 years old? If you go to a sleepover and you're in the bathroom taking a shower and some random guy comes in, like what is that feeling that you're feeling? What can you do? Can you scream for help? Can you do this? What is a predator? Those harder conversations that will trigger the heck out of us traumatized parents, that we need the professionals to help us through those. And so we set those kind of things up where we're able to offer safe spaces for the parents to do it right for their kids and to get ahead of it and offer that information. And we offer information about all different types of period products that are included in the period kit. So we're not just handing out things that they don't know anything about. We have the conversations and what happens when you start your period. How can boys support the girls that start their periods? Can you keep a hoodie in your locker so that if your friend that's a girl needs it one day, she can wrap it around her waist? Those conversations need to be had, and they need to include the dads, and they need to include the boys, and we need to be having these conversations. And so that is a bit of the safe spaces that I've created.
I'm a dad of a teenager now. She'll be 15 on Christmas. And for 6 years, up until 2019, up until then, I had sole legal and sole physical custody of her. And myself and Mrs. LP were having a discussion about, as she got closer to because, once you hit the preteens, you're in your premenstrual age. Mm-hmm. And at any point, we were like, okay, she's going to have her period sometime soon. Mm-hmm. And she asked me, how are you going to deal with that? I said, I'm going to surround myself with a whole slew of people, women, my mom, you. If her mom wants to be involved with that, that's fine. That's going to help me help her through this transition to womanhood, physically.
Yes.
Me being a medic and a clinician and someone who's always been, I grew up in a house with a single parent, predominantly women were in our family. Mm-hmm. And my mom, as a kid, I was always reading her books that she would bring home because she was a nursing student, but she didn't get her nursing license because she couldn't deal with blood when she started doing her clinical. So she went and switched her major and got her degree in criminal justice. But I was always that guy who was interested in anatomy and physiology and different things like that. So when I became a paramedic, it was like, oh, and I always thought about once we had our daughter, I said, man, how am I going to deal with things like that? Mm-hmm. What am I going to do to be prepared about that? Do I do what a lot of guys do and break out the pie graphs and charts and all these different things? And my wife looked at me and she just started laughing and she said, well, you can use that stuff, but it's more about the conversation.
Right.
And it's more about feeling comfortable and secure. And I'm glad that you mentioned the thing about having a hoodie always on standby. I always had like a long sleeve shirt that I would keep in the car because I'm like, if at any point that she would have her period, she could wrap it around her waist, like you said. And I was preparing to have her have like an EDC, which we call it an EDC, but an everyday carry bag. That she keep with her either at school or in the car or both, just in case she needed to change her clothes or what have you, stuff. So mentally, because, I'm a disaster preparedness specialist too. So I'm like, hey, this is a disaster if you happen to have a flow, that you didn't expect to happen or what have you. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. And I'm glad that you have these kits available for the parents and these young girls, because again, that could be something that's traumatic to them. And I remember we had a school dance in the 8th grade, and one of the young ladies, she had on these they weren't leggings, but they were like white pants, and that happened to her. And one of the guys that was at the dance, you know what he did? He took off his jacket and gave it to her and had her wrap around her pants. And I never forgot that. I was like, that's my dude right there.
Yes.
Like I was like,
his parents had conversations with him.
You know what? I was like, I wish, and I don't know where he is now because I'm from St. Louis, so I'm in Charlotte now. But I'm like, that guy was one of my heroes from that day forward, and I thought he was really focusing on her mental well-being also, and for him
that
to
takes
do that,
preparation.
Yes.
It takes conversation, and I appreciate what you said about, in case of emergency and the kit, because that's exactly what the kit was really about. And I was creating it when I was going through it. Like it was that same state where you said, it's like, I know her period's going to come soon. And what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do? And so that's when I thought of this kit, and we created it so that it can be a source of conversation between the parent and the child. It's a together thing, We2 Alliance, that it's a cute little box. It's a pretty colorful box, and it comes with a little bag that you then can take with you wherever you go. And it's got the supplies in there already. And it's not just, here's some pads and tampons. It's, here's pads of different sizes, different brands, so you can try out what you think you might like. Here's some tampons. Here's information about how to try them on. Here's information about how they are made. Here's some options that are more natural, because these things have been known to have toxins. Here's some natural options. Here's a cup. Here's this. Here's some hair ties in case you need to tie your hair back. Here's some gum, or maybe some chocolate, because girls enjoy chocolate, when they're on their periods. Here's a little notebook and a cute pen so you can keep your thoughts about what you're feeling and thinking. Here's some handouts about, this information about this, that, or the other. So it really keeps the conversation going, and really supporting the girls, like you said, their mental state about this major transition in life that happens, and really erasing a lot of the guilt and shame that comes with that.
Sarah, that is such a great everyday carry kit that you created for that situation. And I'm telling you, that is just ingenious. And I'm just surprised nobody else has done anything like that. For me, being a dad of a young girl, and there are other dads that have either sole custody or joint custody of their daughters, that's important. Mm-hmm. Like, I talk to guys about those things. It's like, what are you going to do? It's not a matter. It's just like when I do my conversations about stop the bleed or active violent incidents, which the media still reports as active shooter hostile events. It's not a matter of if, but when and where she's going to have her initial cycle. Mm-hmm. And what are you going to do to help her through that process?
Yeah.
You got to be prepared mentally as well as physically. And having that everyday carry kit is just priceless. I like the idea of having the notebook in there, because she can also document, okay, here's not only the date and time that I had it, that might be when she has her repeated cycle on that particular date. Maybe not at that time, but at least that particular day. Or at least she can prepare a few days before to get ready to maybe start carrying that stuff around with her. And so that's awesome. I want to move on to another point. I want you to talk about, just briefly, from your experience and what you know, I want you to describe what EMDR and CBT is.
Okay. I hope I get the acronym right. EMDR, I believe, is eye movement desensitization. I'm not gonna.
I always get tongue tied with that too.
Desensitization process.
There's a tongue twister.
What is the R? Reprocessing? I don't remember. Reprocessing. Okay, yeah. So desensitization, reprocessing. EMDR. My EMDR therapist used a couple different methods. I did talk therapy with her initially, and she also specialized in EMDR. Felt like it was something that would really benefit me because of the way that the talk therapy sessions were going. Because I was silenced and living in silence for so long, I needed a lot of permission to initiate the conversation. And I couldn't, once I got into it, then it was like, okay, now it's flowing. Now I can talk about it. But I needed a lot of reassurance in the beginning before, like I needed a whole 10-minute, 15-minute conversation before I felt comfortable going into the deeper things. So for me, having a kind of a safe setting, her office became like a safe haven for me. Her office was where I could go and dump all the crap.
Hey, this is uncensored conversation. Don't
Okay.
censor yourself on
To dump all the
because
shit out, and, to just dump it all of it out in one location, and I could designate that one location to deal with the shit, and to deal with it right there. And I used her office, and I remember that it was very triggering for me to be in an open setting. I was very triggering to be if the door was even slightly open. Like, I needed to have a very specific setting, and I started to get more selfish about, like, this is how it needs to be. And so having the controlled space that I felt comfortable with, I connected with the therapist. We could go into processing the information. And just through talk therapy, she started the EMDR without needing a whole big introduction or like, this is what we're going to do. She would simply tap the side of my knees. So she would sit in front of me.
So she did an EFT session with you.
The tapping, yeah. So that's how she introduced me to it with the tapping. Eventually, she used different tools and things like that. But that was what took me much deeper into my memories, because I know that a lot of survivors tend to have repressed memories and like not remember large parts of their lives and things like that. I kind of had a very opposite thing where I have very vivid memories. I could retell it like I was living it now. I swear I could direct a movie. I could direct it because it plays in my head as though it's a movie. And so those are very intrusive memories and flashbacks that would happen to me. And it would play a loop, like, just the intrusive thought, that intrusive memory just play all day long. And I didn't know what to do with the information. And so EMDR for me helped me go deeper into what does that memory mean? Like, let's reprocess what happened. And was super beneficial for me in that sense, because I had the intrusive thoughts. I had the flashbacks that didn't make complete sense as to what happened. I had a lot of missing pieces, even though I had a lot of memories. I had so much trouble connecting the pieces together into a bigger puzzle, because there was so much silence, so much secrecy going on in my family. We were Jehovah's Witnesses, and so we looked like we were this, religious and righteous family. But my father was a full-blown pedophile and connected to other pedophiles within the religion, and there was so much that happened in my childhood that was so confusing, and so many memories that I'm like, that could never, there's no way that happened. I don't know why I have this memory, but there's just no way that happened. It just sounds too crazy. And so EMDR helped me sort out and kind of make the picture a little bit bigger, where the memory was there and it was vivid, but I needed to understand what was going on around it. Like, I needed a light to shine and make it a little bit brighter so that I could see kind of why this happened, or why I remember this, and where did that belong? How old was I, and where in the timeline, did it happen? So that was helpful for me.
And you did cognitive behavior therapy. Did you do CBT first or EMDR first?
EMDR first. I took a break from therapy for a while. I'm going to say a good 5 years of a break from therapy. And then I went back and did cognitive behavioral therapy, because it was suggested to me after I had already kind of exhausted the doctors with symptoms that they don't know what to do with, or they don't know what to call it. So they call it fibromyalgia, because I have inflammation and pain and chronic pain, nerve pain, and things like that. That I now know and understand it to be, the effects of trauma, but they want a diagnosis, they want charts and things like that. So after they've exhausted all things and are kind of like, I don't know what's wrong with you, go to therapy, and came back to cognitive behavioral therapy, because I knew where the pain was coming from. Because, as you deal with different triggers, things come up and you go deeper into your healing, you start connecting with others, and it's not a happy subject. It's not cute. It's not sexy. It's not fun. It's a hard thing to talk about. I do talk about it. I have learned how to talk about it, but it's not something I necessarily enjoy doing. It's not fun. I do know it's necessary for my healing. So but it's not the funnest thing. And so cognitive behavioral therapy for me, I needed to, and I actually happened to be able to go to the same therapist I did EMDR with, so that I didn't have to necessarily start over in the story. You know what I mean? I didn't have to start over with this person and disclose all over again, which I find myself very, very lucky. I have so much gratitude for being able to do that. So many people do not have those opportunities to connect deeply with a therapist. And so I was able to do with her some more therapy, more kind of create a timeline of some of the things that had happened, and also tracking not only kind of a timeline of the pain, but also the healing journey that I had already been in, and kind of like what are helpful to me during these triggers. When this trigger comes up, what tool can I use? Or when I'm dealing with this or this, what other tools come in? And she helped me kind of do like we did a timeline project. In a safe, controlled setting, you can go back into your life and write a timeline. That really helped me. It helped me to go and say at 2, this happened, at 3, this happened, at 4, this happened, and et cetera and so on, because then I could go to like 25 and 30 and say, I did this and I created this safe space and I had this conference and I was on this podcast and I, met this person. So that was important for me as well. Cognitive behavioral therapy, I don't know what it looks like for everyone else, but that's what it looked like for me.
This is the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, sponsored by Anchor, produced by Penton Pending Consulting Solutions, LLC. If you are triggered at any point during this podcast that's streaming everywhere you find your favorite podcast, please call 911. If you don't have an immediate need for services, there are a ton of resources that we have listed in every episode of the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. Those resources include hotlines and phone numbers for trafficking, domestic violence, sexual abuse. Also, we have numbers listed for people that are dealing with substance abuse issues, including alcohol and or drugs. We have Al-Anon for supporters of those, loved ones or friends. We have Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. If you have any suicidal ideation or thinking about suicide, call 988. Again, 988. That is the nationwide number here in the States. That's the 911 number for suicidal issues. I want to continue the conversation that we had with our very special guest, my sister, Sara Almaraz. Sara, I got a bone to pick with you.
Okay.
Because you tried to censor yourself on the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. And what's the first thing that you see in my logo? It says uncensored conversation, especially coming from you, because on Clubhouse in the Trauma Drama room, what did you say? I wish a motherfucker would.
That's me.
Did you not see that?
I did. I'm a recovering people pleaser, LP. What can I say? I'm a recovering people pleaser. And like I had said in that room, I grew up, I was a very good girl. I was very compliant. I was very, I obeyed, I followed the rules, and that didn't serve me very well, and that's when I'm not sugar and spice and everything nice. After having done some healing, Sage Hood, and I wish a motherfucker would. That's more my life motto. That's what I've learned. Sage Hood, and I wish a motherfucker would.
How does that translate in Espanol?
Oh, I don't even know, Elfie. I'm gonna have to think on that one. It's gonna go on teacher.
Look, when we talked yesterday, I forgot to ask you to find the translation for that because I wanted you to say it, but no, that is so. I'm telling you, when you first said that in Clubhouse, and I want you to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about the work that you do as a moderator in Clubhouse and the rooms that you co-moderate.
So, I talked about how I've been supporting survivors and finding their voice through Facebook and social media and meeting them personally and, conferences and things like that. And I still have those communities. And some of them we meet online once a month and other things. And but the community that I found in Clubhouse is it's very special to me. I have a special love for that group of people. I was getting ready to start a very similar club. I was going to call it the Talking Treehouse, and play on talking trees, because I wanted to continue the conversation, but I wanted voices to be heard. Not just, I didn't want us to hide behind a screen on Facebook and type something out. I wanted to use your physical voice. And that was something I was thinking of doing selfishly, because I've always found it difficult to talk out loud, especially about the abuse. I've obviously have learned and have taken a lot of time to do that, but sometimes my voice shakes, sometimes my body will tremble. I get anxious, and so it's difficult. And that was one of the reasons why I asked to not be on camera during this podcast, because it's easier not to be on camera, but I still have the ability to use my voice, and I don't need to worry about what I look like. I don't need to worry about what you look like while you're looking at me. I just can use my voice. And so I wanted to offer that in Clubhouse. And as I'm coming up with the logistics and the, figuring out the rules and Clubhouse and getting everybody connected, I ran across Stacy's room, which is Stacy Henry Carr. Her room is the Butterfly Effect room. And she talks about breaking cycles and childhood trauma. And I was like, oh, yes, this is it right here. And she was actually talking about forgiveness in that room. And that's one thing that I do not buy into. I do not subscribe to the necessity of forgiving our abusers. I don't subscribe to that. And so I had to raise my hand,
Yes. And I was so glad that you did that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the forgiveness aspect, but go ahead.
Yes. So I had to raise my hand, and I found that the people in there that were moderating were on my same wavelength. They were on my frequency. They were not just storytelling like this and this happened to me, because that's part of it. But they were not just doing that. They had already done that. They've been to therapy. They've already invested into their healing. They're supporting other people in their healing, and they know what it is. They know the lingo, the language, and so I landed in a good place. And so I started following them. And then the next room that I landed in was Leah's room. Leah Abraham, she has the trauma drama room. And so she also talks about sexual abuse, which I know is just not, there's a lot about sexual assault, which is different than sexual abuse, which I think that it's important to have proper vocabulary to the subject at hand, because often when you are sexually abused as a child, pedophiles and perpetrators who are stupid enough to mess with children, they don't, a lot of times it's not violent. So it's not like an assault. We don't remember it as a violent act. It's just a very everyday thing that happens. So I like to separate the vocabulary, because there's already a lot of support out there for people who have experienced assault. I mean, the Me Too movement was that. It was for people who have experienced sexual assault in their adulthood. And enough wasn't being said about the people who have experienced sexual abuse in their childhood, which I love about Leah's room, because that's what she centers the conversation on. And again, doing amazing work, because they both invited me to help moderate, because we were on the same wavelength. I was looking to do the same thing, but I also wanted to kind of shift it for myself in a very selfish way, I guess, and not in a good way, but that I was offering spaces for others to find their voices, but I wasn't getting too much of an opportunity to use my voice. I was helping others find their voice, but I wasn't using mine a whole lot. I was supporting them in their journey and finding my ways of support and therapy and all those good things, but I wasn't using my voice a whole lot, and I felt like it was time to do that. And so I felt like it was divine intervention that just before I started my own club and my own room to talk about these things, that I stumbled upon there, so that I could take the opportunity to then not just offer the support, but also use my voice and receive some support for a change. And so that's what's been happening in those rooms. I mean, every week we meet weekly, and any time that I'm not able to make it, I feel it in my soul. I miss it. Like, oh man, I missed the conversation today. I bet it was good. And I go to the replays and stuff like that, because they're intense conversations sometimes. And listening to everyone's verbal meditation of where they're at with any particular subject that they have their room centered around is a beautiful thing to see everybody all in different places of their journey, but also resonate so deeply with what everyone has to say. It brings up, sometimes I go in and I think by the title of the room, oh, I have nothing to say about this. Like, I'm just going to sit back and listen. And then halfway through, I'm like, oh, my hand is hitting that microphone, that little raised hand button, like so fast. And I'm like, oh, I need to say something. I need to say, oh, this resonates with me so much. And so, many times, because I often feel like I come from such an ugly background, ugly childhood, a lot of the things that I say are not pleasant. A lot of the things that I recall from my childhood and that I have to say out loud that are very much true, but are very much disturbing. And so then and it feels sometimes like, oh man, why did I say that? And here I am breaking into tears and things like that. But then others will speak up and say, oh, what Sara said resonated so much with me. And I'm just so glad that you brought that up. And others speak up and will say, you know, like what you said just was so helpful to me in my journey. And that happens to everyone, because, you know, I know other people are like, oh man, will message me in Instagram and things like that, like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, and da da da, but somehow it benefits people who are listening, even in our uncomfortability. Somehow it touches someone else's life, and we there's just a collective healing that's happening in those rooms. It's amazing. It's amazing.
You said something that really I hadn't thought about in particular, but it had been playing in the back of my mind. You talked about there's a difference between sexual abuse and sexual trauma. I want you to lay out 3 to 5 things that make those two different.
Okay. So in my experience, I couldn't connect for a long time with what had happened.
And before you do that, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Before you do that, I want you to give me 3 to 5 things for each. What is sexual abuse to you?
Okay.
What is sexual trauma?
Okay.
And just because I believe that having trigger warning conversations or trigger warning talk, pun intended,
mm-hmm.
is having the difficult conversations. I believe that, you know, I started this podcast because I said, I don't give a damn how people feel about me
mm-hmm.
wanting to have these conversations. What I do give a damn about is speaking with passion from a compassionate point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to facilitate the healing process, we have got to do what's uncomfortable.
Yes.
We have got to approach these triggering issues like domestic violence, sexually based offenses, human and sex trafficking, missing persons. I call it the iceberg conversation,
mm-hmm.
and we talked about that, where people just do the 10% that they can see or that they feel quote unquote comfortable
mm-hmm.
with. But the 90% that's under the water, like the iceberg, that's where the pain, the guilt, the judgment, the shame, the trauma, and all those other negative things lie. And I say, look, on this podcast, if I'm going to be part of it, either we're going to flip that iceberg upside down, or we can keep it underwater.
Mm-hmm.
I got some scuba gear because we about to fucking deep dive into this shit.
Yeah.
And if you got a problem with having the discussion, that's your problem.
Yeah.
Whenever you're ready, homie,
yes,
we right here.
Whenever
you're ready to talk about it, we're ready for you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
There are so many phrases that we've been taught along the way that keep us silenced. And I think that's why it's so important to me to have proper vocabulary and knowledge-based healing when it comes to the things that I discuss. So I don't want to just talk out of my experience, although I do have the experience. I don't want to call myself an expert of any kind, although I do feel like I have a high level of expertise on the subject. But the vocabulary is important because I think some of the words that we come up with minimize what's happened. And when I see that, when I talk about the difference between sexual abuse and sexual assault, it's under the umbrella of sexual trauma, but they're two different things. Sexual trauma, yes, but sexual abuse can happen so silently. Whereas you think of sexual assault as more of a rape, where there's violence involved, there's some sort of physical assault, like it involves pain, right? Whereas sexual abuse of a child doesn't always involve pain. And that's something that has kept many survivors under covers and in silence for so long. I've talked to many, many, many survivors along my journey. And a lot of them say words like, I was molested, or I was touched, or somebody messed with me. We can't even bring ourselves to say I was sexually abused. And now I was one of those people. I was one of those people that used the word molested or messed with, because we don't even want to say who did it to us. It was my dad. I don't want to say that out loud, my father. So we minimize it. I used to minimize it and say I was molested. When the #MeToo movement became popular, it was supporting specifically people who had experienced sexual assault. And a lot of people were speaking out about their stories and talking about, when I was 15, I was raped. When I was 20, I was raped. In college, I was raped. I experienced sexual assault. I was walking down the street and I was attacked. And there needs to be support for those people. Absolutely. But what about the people where they don't associate abuse with what happened to them because it was so part of our everyday lives? For me, my father was an expert groomer, and he groomed everyone, not just whoever he was abusing, but their whole family. He used to use me as bait to bring kids into our home, and he was a full-blown pedophile. Like every child was his target. And so okay. I think that those types of the survivors that say, I didn't know that I really was a survivor because it didn't cause pain. Sometimes it caused pleasure. That is so confusing to me because I felt, my body reacted this way without me telling it to. And there's so much shame around that. And I know I found a tremendous amount of healing once I was able to give myself permission to say that wasn't my fault, that my body reacted in such a way. It wasn't my fault that my body, it was simply doing what it needed to do, where I wasn't associating it with pain. Therefore, it's not abuse. It couldn't have been abuse. I wasn't abused. Nobody beat me up. My father didn't punch me in the face. He didn't beat me. But yet I still have the effects. So I think that it's important to have the vocabulary to know that abuse is different than assault, and the effects of a very silent and very subtle thing that happens when you're sexually abused as a child and within your own home with people that are supposed to be raising you and keeping you safe. It's very silent, very quiet, very normal, and confusing to a child. Because I remember listening to one of your episodes that someone was just on, and she said in the weirdest time, it's like you wouldn't think that they would abuse you on that day when all this is going on, but even then they would abuse you. I remember being like 5 or 6 and having a stomach bug and throwing up I remember throwing up and even then being sexually abused because it was just a part of life. And that doesn't sound like abuse. That doesn't sound like assault. That doesn't sound like violence until you process what really happened. And so I think the vocabulary is important.
What would you say in closing on that point if someone says tomato, tomato? This is just semantics to me. What would you say to that?
I would say to address your triggers individually and to go deeper into them, because silence is a part of childhood sexual abuse. It goes hand in hand. And it's not until we start to talk that some of those things and memories and things come up and triggers come up. And so I would say to lean into your triggers and go deeper and find out whether you need healing from any of the things that silenced, because like I said, sexual abuse and silence are twin brothers. And so if you haven't been able to find your voice, then find out what's triggering you to keep that silence even now.
Sara, you know, the story and the information and the knowledge that you have makes you a subject matter expert. And I tell people all the time, you can be a subject matter expert without a degree. You can be a subject matter expert without a certification. You can be a subject matter expert without all of the bells and whistles that we typically give people that are. Me being a medic, I'm licensed and I'm certified in my profession. I don't have a college degree, not an associate's, not a bachelor's, not a none of that. I've been called a subject matter expert for years because of the training, the license, and the certifications that I have, and the work that I've done, and the work that I continue to do. I've been in this game since 2006. And so life experiences can make a person an expert. The work that you have done and are doing, along with your partnership that you've had with Dr. Bakari, that makes you a subject matter expert. And it makes you an unfortunate but fortunate subject matter expert, because some people get into helping folks that have experienced traumas and they've never experienced it. I've had people on the podcast that never were victimized by sexual-based offenses or trafficking. Maybe didn't have any domestic violence in the home. But because they choose to go into this field, they became subject matter experts. It's just like somebody who becomes it's just like a man who becomes an OBGYN who does not have any children and never had got pregnant. Does that make him any less of a subject matter expert? You know, on
Right.
children and women's, physiological issues. And so I'm glad that you talked about the idiopathic, which means unknown, pain aspect of the trauma that you experience. Because as you said, sometimes doctors, they don't understand that idiopathy, and again, which is the study of the unknown in terms of medicine, happens. And we know that as clinicians, that sometimes when you don't have a definite thing you can point to, oh, I'm having chest pain. Well, is it because of a pipe problem? Is it where is your arteries are hardened or they're clogged? Is it a pump problem? Where is your heart? Is it too big? Is it too small? Or you having things that are neurologically affecting it? So when we're talking about these idiopathic things that occur, if it's not something that you can directly look at and point to or get a blood test for, you start thinking it got to be something mental.
Right.
It's got to be something. And when they find out that it's trauma related, because the body keeps the score, right? Famous book, right?
Great book.
We all know about that. Great book. The body keeps the score. I saw a story the other day about a guy who had gotten a heart transplant. The transplanted heart that he received was from a man who committed suicide. Do you know that man that got that transplanted heart after a number of years committed suicide? And they don't have anything else in his life to point it to. He was not having any suicidal issues beforehand. He had not had any other problems going on in his life or anything like that. And I said, damn, there it is.
That's interesting.
Trauma got transplanted to him in that surgery. Wow. So the body damn sure keeps the score.
Yes.
Unfortunately. Sara, we're going to be wrapping up this podcast because I can talk to you every day and twice a month. I want you to tell people how they can get in touch with you, and we'll have your contact information listed in the show notes. and then we're going to move on to the missing person case that I got an update for. And I want you to hold on because it's only a few minutes.
Okay.
While I play while I play that story. But how can people get in touch with you?
You can reach me on Instagram, We2 Alliance. That's the letters we, the number 2, and then the word alliance. I'm weekly on Clubhouse in the Trauma Drama Room, and as well as the Butterfly Effect Room. So find us on Clubhouse, a community of amazing people where you can find support. Talking Trees Survivors on Facebook, another page. We still offer some workshops and things like that, so we often post there. Another amazing community to follow. And yeah, mostly Instagram would be the easiest way to reach me. Please reach out for support. This is not an easy thing to reach out, but when you know, you know. And I'm someone that knows. When you know, you know. And I'm someone that knows. So if you're looking for any level of support when it comes to this, please message me directly and I can point you in a great direction.
And also, again, we're going to have your contact information listed in the show notes. If you, for whatever reason, don't look at the show notes, but you want to get in touch with me about this particular podcast or any others, send me an email, triggerwarningtalkpodcast@gmail.com. Again, triggerwarningtalkpodcast@gmail.com. We're going to switch over to our last segment. Oh, I got one other question for you before I do that. If you were to write a letter or an email to your younger self, to little Sara, what would you say?
Oh, LP, inner child work. If I go
Love me.
If I go deep into it, it's the one subject that makes me cry. Still a lot of unhealed, healing work to do there. My inner child is probably about 4 or 5 years old. And I would say I actually wrote her a letter a couple years back. And it was the first time I had addressed her. And the biggest message was that I'm listening. I'm listening now. And every time that she knocks on my door, crying and asking for attention and needing to talk, I'll open the door. I'll answer the knock.
Sara, I want to thank you for that. I want you to mute your microphone. I'm going to give you a break here. I love you so much, and I want to thank you for that. I'm listening. Wow. We're going to talk about an updated story that I did a few episodes ago on a missing person case. And for those that are watching, I'm going to play the news story that Mrs. LP gave to me. And this story is about a young lady named KIERRA Coles. And so this was on July 21st of this year. So it was only a few days ago. This is from NBCChicago.com. And it's titled New Clues in the Case of Missing Pregnant Postal Worker KIERRA Coles. Check this out.
Now, NBC5 investigates exclusive tonight. It involves the case of KIERRA Coles, the pregnant postal worker missing since October of 2018.
Tonight, for the first time, a top Chicago police detective sits down with us to talk about the clues, the evidence, and the key to solving this case.
She didn't disappear on her own accord, in my opinion.
Senior homicide detective Will Svilar has studied every moment of the day 26-year-old KIERRA Coles was last seen. And Chicago police have now released a video timeline. The pregnant postal worker called her mom as she shopped for baby supplies on the afternoon of Tuesday, October 2nd, 2018.
She was just so excited she didn't even know what to get.
No sign that anything was wrong.
No sign.
That was the last conversation Karen Phillips ever had with her daughter. A short time later, you see KIERRA carrying her shopping bags into her apartment building in the 8100 block of South Vernon. That evening, Detective Svilar says she left in her car with a man they call a person of interest.
Is she driving or is the man?
She is driving.
They went to a 24-hour Walgreens at 8600 South Cottage Grove, and the security tape shows her withdrawing hundreds of dollars from an ATM machine. Very unusual for KIERRA, her mother says, especially at 10:43 on a Chicago night.
I don't understand why she'd be taking $400 out, because she real cautious with spending.
This was the last time KIERRA Coles was ever seen. Police say the evidence shows the man drove her car back to her neighborhood alone and parked down the street before 11:45 that night and got out on the passenger side of the car.
Why would he get out of the passenger seat? I can only speculate. It's not like you're opening a car into traffic. My speculation is he's staging the seat.
Perhaps sliding the driver's seat forward by hand to make it look like KIERRA had been driving. Police say he then walked to another car parked nearby and drove away.
His car? Yes.
Same person of interest.
Yes.
Though this is still officially a missing person case, Svilar is a homicide detective who's worked hundreds of murder cases since 1998.
Do you think whatever happened was over in less than 1 hour?
Yes. I think the last time we see KIERRA, she is unfortunately not alive much longer after that.
Still, Svilar emphasizes there's always a chance KIERRA could be alive. As for the person of interest, police say he returned to KIERRA's apartment alone the next morning and left with some items in hand.
This person that we're referring to is not a stranger. This person has access to this apartment all the time. Is it unusual for him to go in there? No, it's not. In the totality of circumstances, considering what has happened probably the night before, yeah, that's a big deal.
Chicago police have never named the person of interest, but Karen Phillips says he is Josh Simmons, KIERRA's boyfriend and presumed father of her unborn child. NBC5 Investigates found no criminal history in his past. Karen Phillips reported her daughter missing the night after the ATM withdrawal and says she was there with Simmons as police searched the apartment. Did you ask if he'd seen her?
Yeah, he said he hadn't seen her, but he'd been talking to her, which found out that was a lie.
He gave some conflicting accounts, wasn't consistent on some of his statements, and then didn't want to talk to us anymore.
Simmons soon moved out of state with the mother of some of his children. He did not respond to our written request for comment, mailed to his last known address in Louisiana.
What do you want to say to Josh Simmons?
I want to say that I know you know something. You know what happened. You don't know the pain that I feel not knowing what's going on with my child. And I wish you would come forward and tell us what really happened to KIERRA.
If you have any information about the disappearance of KIERRA Coles, contact Chicago Police at 833-408-0069 or 312-746-7330 or online at cpdtip.com.
Again, if you have any information about this story about KIERRA Coles, please contact the Chicago Police Department because they definitely want to find out what happened to this young lady and how we can get her back to her mom, back to her family, back to her loved ones. Good, bad, or ugly, we want to make sure that KIERRA Coles is found. And it's important that I say that because a lot of times people say, well, she was an adult, even though it might have been circumstantial, what happened to her. Sometimes adults just leave. Sometimes the adults just up and disappear. And the family may say, oh, well, they would never do that, or they would never just leave, or they would never not contact me anymore. That happens sometimes. But that's not the majority of the situations that we tend to find, especially under these circumstances. She was a government employee. She was a postal worker. She was pregnant, and up until her disappearance, nobody's really saying that there were huge problems that was going on in her world. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. I want to give healing energies and a big hug and flowers to my sister, my friend, Sara. Thank you for telling your story, and thank you for having the strength and the courage and the wisdom to be a subject matter expert that is willing to help other people in spite of the traumas that they have faced and are facing. I want to also let everybody know in closing that you're not alone. This podcast is open for anyone, whether you are a subject matter expert that deals with these traumas, or you are just an individual. You don't have to be a clinician. You don't have to be a practitioner. You don't have to be someone who has clients or patients. If you want to share your story, whether it's about trafficking, domestic violence, any sexually based offense, if you have a missing person story that you want to talk about, even if that person isn't missing, because we did a story about a young man in St. Louis, Danye Jones. And that's when I did the theater person interview. He was not missing. He was found hanging in the backyard of his home by his family. Nobody has been brought to justice. Nobody's been arrested. And nobody knows if there were one or more killers that took his life. We talk about those injustices, kidnappings, abductions, runaways. So in closing, again, I want to thank Sara. I want to say this to everybody. Live in awareness, don't live in fear. Live in awareness, don't live in fear. And especially nowadays, make sure that you take care of yourself and seek help if you need it. For the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, I'm LP. Love you all. LP out.